So I'm going to begin with a joke, and just to preface it, if you work in one of these hospitals, please don't take offense. So this Jewish wealthy man named Schwartz happened to be rushed to the emergency room at one of Boston's best hospitals, and that is General Mass. And at General Mass, he received the best care possible. He received VIP treatment. But on his third day there, he asked to be transferred to Beth Israel Hospital, the Jewish hospital right down the road. And no one could really figure out why. They thought they did something wrong. And so finally, a nurse at Beth Israel comes in and asks, knowing that Beth Israel is a little less prestigious, it's a little smaller of a hospital, she comes in and asks, "Mr. Schwartz, why is it that you decided to be transferred to this hospital here?" And he said, "Here at this Jewish hospital, I can complain." And so, Jews, we have a thing about complaining, at least we're stereotyped to love to complain and love to kvetch. We hear it all the time, be it in a rhetorical question, "Rabbi, how much longer is this Seder actually going to be?" Or maybe we hear it in some kind of trivial complaint about things that don't really matter. We sometimes complain just to complain, even though we don't really have anything to complain about. In fact, you might have seen the movie Annie Hall with Woody Allen. And Woody Allen says, there's a joke that sums up the story of my life. And he says it takes place at a Catskill mountain resort, and there's two ladies sitting at a dinner table, and one of them says, "Boy, the food in this place is really awful." And the other one says, "Yes, the portions are terrible." And Woody Allen goes on to say, this essentially sums up how I feel about life. And that is to say, Jewish conversations go from one complaint to the next to the next. And you might actually say that if you were reading our Torah portion for this week, or even reading, following along as we've gone from the Exodus out of Egypt into the wilderness and we're just approaching the Promised Land, you might actually say that this joke about these two ladies going from complaining to complaining sums up the years of Exodus from Egypt. Throughout the wanderings, the Israelites just keep on letting Moses have it. "Moses, have you taken us out of Egypt only to die here in the desert? Moses, we're thirsty, give us water. Moses, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt, and those fish were free. And also there were tons of cucumbers, melons, leeks, and garlic." And after all this complaining, you think that it would finally come to a stop. But no, we actually encounter a man in this week's Torah portion who takes complaining to the next level. And that man, his name is Korach. And this week's Parsha is named after this man, Korach, for who I just want to give you a little bit of a brief intro to Korach. He happens to be some kind of high-up guy, at least he's a Levite, and he comes to Moses at the very beginning of the Parsha to lodge a complaint. And it might seem that at first his complaint is somewhat legitimate, but we're going to go into it in just 1 second. Korach says to Moses, he says, "Rav lechem ki ha'edah kulam kedoshim." You take too much for yourselves, Moses and Aaron, for all of us in this congregation are holy. God is among all of us, not just you, Moses and Aaron, and you elevate yourselves above the rest of the community. But Korach goes too far, and his cause is much less holy than it actually seems. Because what does Korach do next? He challenges Moses to a holiness contest. Guess who wins? So Korach isn't about holiness for all, as it might seem. Korach is really about power for himself, trying to ascend the ranks of power among the Israelite community. And I'd say that my favorite Korach complaint is when he twists God's promise to the Israelites into a snarky little jab. I think there's a Yiddish word, the grija, right? Where you stick a knife in someone and you twist it just a little bit, and you do that in the form of some kind of a complaint. Well, here's Korach's Grisha. He says, Ki ha'eletanu me'eretz zavat chalav u'davash, laha'mitenu b'midbar. You've brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey, Egypt in his view, only to kill us in the desert. Not you brought us to the land of milk and honey, you brought us from the land of milk and honey. So Korach is this example, again, of probably how not to argue. And the rabbis do a lot of arguing in the Talmud. It's not like you shouldn't argue. The rabbis, if you ever have read the Talmud, it's one debate after the next. And the rabbis talk a lot about how one might argue and how you're supposed to be able to lodge a complaint or have discourse with each other. And they say Korach is the example of how not to argue. And they say there's two kinds of arguments. One is called an argument for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim. And an argument like this, an example of it is between the two famous sages, Hillel and Shammai, who always disagree with one another, but at the same time always have the utmost respect and honor for the other's opinion. And in fact, they're both working towards the same goal. And then they say there's another type of argument, the argument that's not for the sake of heaven. And Korach and his followers are the paradigmatic example of the argument that's not for the sake of heaven. Because their complaining wasn't meant to unite the community. It was meant to divide it. Korach, in other words, is a kvetcher. And I don't mean that in the cute way that we sometimes talk about kvetching. And kvetching can be cute in a nostalgic kind of way if you're in the mid-20th century ethnic Jewish humor mode of Woody Allen. But kvetching might just hold us back a little bit. It might limit us. And so I want to suggest another way that we can approach how we lodge a complaint, or how we look into ourselves and look into other people and might offer them something constructive. And the example that I want to give is the example of Jewish appreciative inquiry. And so you might be asking yourselves, what is appreciative inquiry? There's many authors who have written about this, and I'm going to give a little bit of summary, but this has been something that I think I've taken with me from my studies about how to really be effective around other people in a positive way. An appreciative inquiry, it's refraining from complaining and instead recognizing and valuing the best in people and the world around us. It affirms the past and present strengths that someone might have and asks the question, how can we use these strengths to grow to the best of our potential? Appreciative inquiry is an art form in which one practices asking questions that strengthen the capacity of others to realize where they might change and grow. So the question for us tonight is how we can move from kvetch to a more positive way to examine the world around us. I want to give one heartfelt example of something I experienced this week, the way that people were talking about a particular woman who I think embodied this idea of seeing the world through a positive lens and bringing it up and not down. And this week I had the privilege of attending a shiva for a woman named Sylvia Weintraub. She passed away at the ripe old age of 96 and a half. And she was the mother of Joe Weintraub, the mother-in-law of Carol, who are sitting, and also the mother of Richard Weintraub, who are all with us here tonight. And what was unique about this woman, and what I was struck by, was the way, again, that her family spoke about her. In one particular line, someone said, she was not your typical Jewish mother. And what they were referring to was her anti-kvetch mentality. Instead, she worked to fill the room with positivity, wit, laughter, and to brighten the lives of those around her, to raise people up, to help them grow, and never to bring them down. This is the legacy that she has left the Weintraubs as a family, but also, I think, a valuable lesson for us here tonight. There's a reason that Korach is the example of how not to argue. There's a reason why he loses that holiness contest that I mentioned. What I might not have mentioned is what happens afterwards, and that is the world opens up and swallows him and his followers whole. And the reason this happens is because kvetching isn't holy. So my Shabbat challenge for us tonight, myself included, is to catch yourself before you complain. And when you do, turn that complaint into a positive question that values the strengths of others and helps people, communities, and the world to grow. And with that, I wish you Shabbat Shalom.